Something big is about to go down in the Caribbean Sea. Over the past few weeks, U.S. warships haven't just stopped Venezuelan ships there. They've fired missiles at them and even seized some vessels. In response, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has deployed his Navy ships in the area. What used to be a paradise for tourists has now turned into a battle zone. But the real question is, why is the U.S. about to start a new military conflict so close to its own border? It used to be a collapsing petrostate, so why has it suddenly become so important? And how do the Caribbean's geography, its oil reserves, and its history all come together to make it so crucial for the U.S.? Make sure to watch this video till the end, because today we're going to talk about the past, present, and future of this conflict. The impact won't just be felt in the Western Hemisphere, but all over the world. So why are things getting so bad in the Caribbean Sea? To understand that, let's first take a look at the geography of the area. The Caribbean Sea might look small, but its location makes it super important in world politics. It's just about 150 kilometers south of Florida, right next to the U.S. And it not only connects South and North America, but also links the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Panama Canal. This canal is the busiest sea trade route in the world. Every year, over 14,000 ships and millions of tons of goods pass through here. Whoever controls the Caribbean basically controls trade between two of the world's biggest oceans. It controls the area. Venezuela is right at the heart of this trade hotspot. Its coastline along the Caribbean Sea stretches about 2,800 kilometers, making it one of the countries in South America with the longest coastlines. Along this coast, there are major seaports and naval bases like Puerto Cabello, La Guaira, and Maracaibo. The oil-rich Gulf of Venezuela and Lake Maracaibo Basin are not just export hubs, but are also very close to international shipping lanes. And this is both Venezuela's biggest strength and its biggest vulnerability. On the eastern side, there's the Essequibo region, which is currently disputed with Guyana. This area was neglected for a long time, but now huge oil reserves have been discovered there. These reserves have made the region even more important. If Venezuela manages to take control of it, its influence in the Caribbean will grow even more, and it'll be right near the Atlantic trade routes. But Venezuela's location also puts it right in the crosshairs of the U.S. and its allies. For example, it's only about 800 kilometers from Puerto Rico and just 30 kilometers from Dutch islands like Aruba and Curacao. It's just a short flight from the U.S. base in Florida. That means if any fight breaks out in this area, the U.S. will automatically get involved. But geography is only half the story. Venezuela's real power lies beneath its land, and that's oil. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, about 304 billion barrels. That's way more than Saudi Arabia's 267 billion barrels and the U.S.'s 70 billion barrels. Most of these reserves are in the Orinoco Belt, north of the Orinoco River. It's oil. This oil is very crude and thick, and refining it is quite difficult. But there's so much of it that the whole world knows about Venezuela's oil. Because of this oil, Venezuela was once one of the richest countries in Latin America. In the 1970s, Venezuela pumped 3 million barrels of oil daily, most of which was exported to the U.S. Back then, Caracas wasn't just any capital, it was an energy superpower. Thanks to this oil, Venezuela saw big buildings, highways, and cities being developed. Venezuela's per capita GDP was even higher than Spain and Greece. Up until the early 2000s, the fuel used in American cars and ships mostly came from Venezuela. But that oil ended up being Venezuela's biggest weakness. In the late 1980s, when oil prices dropped, Venezuela's economy collapsed. Corruption, mismanagement, and political unrest made things even worse. In the 1990s, one economic crisis after another hit, and finally in 1999, Hugo Chavez became Venezuela's president. There was a big boom in the oil industry. But then in 2010, when oil prices dropped, Venezuela went into a severe crisis. By 2015, the economic situation in Venezuela had become really bad. After Hugo Chavez died in 2013, Nicolas Maduro became president. Maduro inherited the Bolivarian Revolution and an economy that was dangerously dependent on oil and already in ruins. Very quickly, inflation shot up into triple digits, and protests broke out all over the country. That same year, the opposition took control of Venezuela's National Assembly. which led to Maduro's government got into serious trouble. In response, President Maduro started tightening his grip on power. He sidelined institutions and used security forces to crush the opposition. This was a turning point for Washington. In 2015, the U.S. officially declared Venezuela a national security threat, laying the groundwork for the sanctions that followed. Since 2015, Washington has slapped over 900 sanctions on Venezuela, targeting the government's oil company, banks, shipping, gold, and more. Exports and even senior officials were targeted. The whole point was to cut off Nicolas Maduro's access to money and force him to step down. These sanctions wrecked oil production and pushed Venezuela into its worst economic crisis ever. Over 7 million Venezuelans had to flee to Colombia, Brazil, and other countries. But despite all this, Venezuela managed to survive by selling cheap oil to countries like China, India, and Russia. China invested in Venezuela's oil fields. Billions of dollars have been invested through infrastructure projects. India is buying cheaper crude oil so it can refine it domestically. Russia has offered financial, banking, and military support to take control of Venezuelan energy. Even American companies like Chevron are operating under special licenses because completely blocking Venezuelan oil would reduce global supply and cause fuel prices to skyrocket for American customers. So basically, these sanctions have wrecked Venezuela's economy. They tried, but completely failed to change the regime. Now the big question is, why doesn't the US just ignore Venezuela? At first glance, the obvious answer is its strategic location and huge oil reserve. But in reality, that's just the beginning. The inside story is way more interesting. For Washington, Venezuela represents something much bigger. It's actually a threat to US control over the Western Hemisphere. Since the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, America has always seen Latin America as its backyard. It means a zone where no other country can interfere. But Venezuela, first under Hugo Chavez and now under Nicolas Maduro, has challenged this idea. Russian military advisors, Chinese loans, and even Iranian drones are now part of Venezuela's defense system. The Caribbean, once considered America's safe zone, is now filled with a bunch of foreign players. And it doesn't stop there. Venezuela is in South America, but its oil wealth connects it even to the Middle East, 304 billion barrels worth. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. It's one of the few countries that could change the global energy balance. For years, the US has relied on oil from the Middle East, which has hugely benefited countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran. The Gulf choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, and the Suez Canal became flashpoints because the world depended so much on the oil passing through these routes. But if Washington gets access to Venezuelan oil, which is being just 4 days away from Gulf Coast refineries, means they can reduce their reliance on the Middle East. This would seriously cut down Saudi Arabia's influence within OPEC. Iran would lose its leverage to block this choke point, and even Russia's grip on Europe's energy supply would loosen. Simply put, control over Venezuela isn't just important for the US. It could shift the balance of power in the Middle East and other regions too. For countries that have used this oil as leverage, that leverage could be gone for good. That's why the Caribbean War is way more intense than in Latin America. In September 2025, the US Navy attacked ships accused of being part of Venezuelan drug smuggling networks. Just a few days later, American forces raided a Venezuelan fishing boat in the same waters. For Venezuela, this wasn't just an anti-drug operation. It was an attack on their sovereignty. President Nicolas Maduro gave a strong response. Inside Venezuela, they announced the deployment of their army, police, and militias in the battlefront zones to defend against this foreign aggression. They said there's a looming threat of war over Venezuela, just a few kilometers from its coastline. But this conflict goes way beyond controlling drugs or fishing boats. It's a fight for control over the Caribbean Sea. Washington wants to show it can monitor the region and maintain its influence, while Venezuela wants to prove it can't be pushed around. Drugs and fishing, attacks on ports are actually a big warning sign of a major struggle ahead. The wars happening in Ukraine or the Middle East are completely different from what's going on right at America's doorstep in the Caribbean. The southern ports of the US, its Gulf, oil refineries, and the Panama Canal all depend on shipping routes that pass through these waters. Any disruption here would seriously impact American trade, energy, and military operations. That's why an aggressive Venezuela, especially one backed by Russia, China, and Iran, is a huge concern for the U.S. It's a big risk. This whole crisis is really important for Venezuela too. President Maduro is dealing with economic crisis and political instability in his country. So, a conflict in the Caribbean gives him a chance to unite his people. By militarizing the coastal areas, deploying troops in these battlefront zones, and forming alliances with foreign powers, he can challenge American imperialism. This will strengthen his grip on power while making things more complicated for Washington. But the date shows just how dangerous this kind of conflict can get. Back in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis almost triggered a nuclear war in the Caribbean, and even today, the geography hasn't changed one bit. Florida is still really close to these waters. The Panama Canal remains a global choke point, and these islands are still vulnerable. What has changed are the players. Instead of Cuba and the Soviet Union, it's now Venezuela, backed by Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran, openly challenging the U.S. The question now isn't whether the Caribbean is important or not. The real question is how far both countries are willing to go. Will Washington back down from the threat of a new conflict so close to home? Or will Venezuela, with support from its powerful allies, force the U.S. to step back? If you liked the video, be sure to share it with others to help our content reach more people. See you in the next video.